My stepmom falsely accused me of abuse to hide her affair, left me homeless at 15. But 14 years later, I revealed my sister was her lover's child, and everyone's life collapsed. I'm 31 years old, work in real estate development, and what I'm about to tell you basically destroyed my family, or well, what was left of it. The thing is, for as long as I can remember, I've been carrying a secret that wasn't mine. And when it finally came to light like 2 years ago, everything exploded in a way that even I didn't expect. And that's saying something because I knew it was going to be ugly. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was 4 years old and my mom died of cancer. I don't remember much about her, honestly, just flashes of things. Like the smell of her perfume or how she hugged me, but nothing concrete, you know? What I do remember perfectly is the feeling of emptiness that remained after, and how my dad, Frank he was like 27 when he was widowed, imagine, basically shut down emotionally and became this super strict and cold guy who only knew how to work and give orders. We spent like 3 years like that, just the two of us in that house, and then my dad met Helen. I was 7 when they got married, and at first she seemed super nice. I mean, she brought me gifts, cooked my favorite meals, asked me how school went, all those things a stepmother does when she wants you to like her, I guess. And it worked, honestly, because after years of living with a dad who barely talked to me, having someone pay attention to me felt good. But everything changed when Gabrielle was born. I was like 9 years old when she arrived, and it was like suddenly I stopped existing to Helen. All the smiles, all the attention, everything went to my sister. Well, my half-sister, technically. And look, I understand that a baby needs attention. I'm not stupid, but this was different. It was like Helen had been acting this whole time and didn't need to keep up the facade anymore. Things got worse as Gabrielle grew up. Helen spoiled her in everything, literally everything, while she treated me like I was a nuisance. My dad never said anything. He was always working, or when he was home, he basically let Helen handle everything related to us kids. I did house chores. Gabrielle didn't. I had a strict curfew. Gabrielle could do whatever she wanted. I got in trouble for any little thing. Gabrielle could break something and Helen would find a way to blame me. It was exhausting, and by the time I hit my teens, I was basically counting down the days until I turned 18 and could get out of there. You know what I mean? But then something happened that changed everything, and when I say everything, I mean it completely destroyed my life. At least for a good while. I was 15. It was summer, and I was walking through the park near my house when I saw Helen. She was with a guy I knew by sight, Derek, a neighbor who lived like 3 blocks from us. And they weren't just chatting, they were kissing. Like it wasn't a friendly kiss or anything like that, it was intense and obvious there was something between them. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. Part of me, I wanted to confront them, but another part, the bigger part, just wanted to run away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Eventually I left before they saw me, but I spent days unable to sleep well, going over whether I should tell my dad or not. I was afraid he wouldn't believe me, that Helen would deny it and I'd end up in more trouble. So I decided to stay quiet. But the universe, or whatever, had other plans. Like 2 weeks after that, I got home early one day because basketball practice had been canceled. Helen was in her room, talking on the phone, and the door was barely cracked open. I don't know why I stood there listening. I should have kept walking, but something in her tone of voice made me stop. And then I heard her say, verbatim, that Gabrielle wasn't my dad's daughter, that she was Derek's, and that no one could ever know because her entire life depended on my dad never finding out. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I mean, in that moment everything made sense, why Helen had married my dad, why she protected Gabrielle so much, everything. But I also realized that now I was carrying this information that could destroy my family, and I was 15. I didn't know what to do with that. I tried to act normal, but Helen must have noticed something weird about me because she started treating me even worse. More hostile, more watchful. And then, like a month after I heard that conversation, everything went to hell in the worst possible way. I came home from school one day, and there was a patrol car outside my house. Helen was crying in the living room. Gabrielle, who was like 6, was with a neighbor, and my dad saw me walk in, and the look on his face, God, I'll never forget that look. He grabbed me by the arm so hard he left bruises and started yelling at me about how dare I, that I was a degenerate, that I was going to jail. I didn't understand anything. I was in total shock. And then Helen said, between sobs, that I had touched Gabrielle, inappropriately. The next few hours were a blurry nightmare. The police questioned me, searched my room, talked to my dad, to Helen, tried to talk to Gabrielle, but she was confused and scared and wasn't saying anything coherent. I denied everything, obviously, because I hadn't done absolutely anything, but I could see in my dad's eyes that he had already condemned me. For him, I was guilty. Period. The investigation continued for several days, and during that time my dad barely spoke to me. He looked at me with disgust, with hatred, and I felt so powerless because how do you prove you didn't do something? The investigators eventually didn't find evidence of anything because there was nothing to find. Gabrielle never said anything that incriminated me because nothing ever happened, but for my dad that didn't matter. One night, like 2 weeks after the accusation, my dad came to my room and told me, "You have 10 minutes to pack what you can carry and get out of my house." I tried to explain. I begged him to listen to me, but he just yelled, "I don't want to hear you. I don't want to see you again. If I see you near this house or your sister, I'm calling the police." Helen was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, watching me with this barely disguised expression of satisfaction, and in that moment I knew she had planned it all. She had realized that I knew her secret, and this was her way of getting rid of me before I could say anything. I packed what I could in a backpack, clothes, my birth certificate, like $80 I had saved, and I left. I was 15 years old and literally had nowhere to go. The first few days I slept in the park, on benches, wherever I could. I was constantly hungry, cold at night, and had a fear I can't even describe. I tried to go to school because at least there I had a roof and could use the bathroom, but eventually the teachers noticed something was wrong and started asking questions, so I stopped going. I found an abandoned warehouse in the industrial part of town where I stayed. There were other homeless people there too, and that's where I met Theodore. Theodore was like 50-something years old. He was a war veteran, had lost everything to alcohol but had been sober for like 2 years when I met him. He took me under his wing, let's say, taught me how to survive on the streets, where to get food, what places to avoid, how not to draw attention. He was gruff and direct, but he was also the only person who treated me with something resembling dignity at that time. I spent like 6 months like that, living in that warehouse, doing odd jobs where I could, basically trying to survive one day at a time. Theodore kept telling me I had to get out of that town, that as long as I was there I wasn't going to be able to move forward. And he was right. One day he told me he had a cousin, Keith, who managed a restaurant in the city, like 2 hours away, and that he could get me work washing dishes if I was willing to. Work hard. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my stuff, which fit in a backpack, everything I owned in the world, and got on a bus. Theodore gave me the last $50 he had for the ticket. I never saw him after that day, but to this day I think about him and hope he's okay wherever he is. Keith gave me the job. Let me sleep in the restaurant's storage room the first few weeks until I could save up to rent a room in a kinda crappy but cheap place. The work was hard, 12-hour shifts washing dishes, cleaning, doing whatever was necessary, but it was honest and I was grateful. I worked nights mainly, and that's where I met Michelle. She was a waitress, studying at university, and for some reason she decided to talk to me beyond just saying hi. She asked me how I was, brought me extra food, sat with me during breaks. Eventually, I told her my story. Not everything. Not about Helen and Gabrielle's secret, but about the false accusations and ending up on the street. I expected her to run, away, but instead, she told me I should get my GED, that I was smart and could do more than wash dishes my whole life. Michelle basically convinced me to sign up for the GED, helped me study, and like a year later, I got it. I was 17 at that point, still working at the restaurant, but now with a high school diploma. Things started to improve little by little. Michelle introduced me to her dad, who worked in real estate development, and he offered me a job as an assistant. It was basically running errands and paperwork at first, but I learned quickly and was hungry to progress. Her dad, I don't know. I think he saw something in me. He started teaching me the business, took me to meetings, explained things. By the time I was 21, I was managing my own small projects. And by 25, I had my own real estate development company. Nothing huge, but it was doing well. Michelle and I got married when I was 26. She had just finished her master's in education. We had Austin a year later. And let me tell you, when I held my son for the first time, I cried like I had never cried in my life. It was happiness, yes, but it was also this weird mix of joy and pain because I thought about my dad, about how he had decided to believe Helen over me, about how I would never do that to my son. We bought a house in a good neighborhood, nothing ostentatious but nice, with a big yard for Austin. On paper, my life was exactly what you'd expect. Successful, stable, happy. But the truth is, I always carried this. Gabrielle's secret. The rage at what Helen had done to me. The pain that my dad had abandoned me when I needed him most. And then, 16 years after he kicked me out of the house, my dad found me on Facebook. He sent me a message saying he wanted to talk, that many years had passed, that maybe we could reconnect. I don't know what I expected, an apology, for him to admit he'd been wrong, but his message didn't say any of that, just that he wanted to see me. Michelle told me the decision was mine, that she would support whatever I decided. I spent days thinking about it, and in the end, curiosity won. I gave him my number and we talked on the phone. His voice sounded the same, older maybe, but the same. He asked me how I was. I told him broadly that I was married, had a son, worked in real estate. He was quiet for a moment and then said he was glad I was doing well, that they were doing well too, that Helen was still with him and Gabrielle was engaged. No mention of what happened, no apology, nothing. We agreed they would come visit me, and when they arrived, it was so surreal. My dad was 58 years old now, more gray hair, more wrinkles, but the same hard expression he always had. Helen looked nervous. Tried to smile, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She probably thought I was going to say something about her secret. And Gabrielle, who was now 24 years old, looked confused to be there, like she didn't really know why her dad had insisted so much on coming. The visit was awkward, forced, everyone trying to act normal when none of it was normal. Michelle received them with courtesy, but I could feel her tension too. Austin, bless him, broke the ice by being the chatty and adorable 3-year-old that he is. After dinner, while Michelle was putting Austin to bed, my dad asked to talk to me privately. We went to my study and that's where he dropped the bomb, said they had come because they needed a favor. Gabrielle was getting married soon and they needed help with money, if I could contribute, or better yet, if I could give them my house because it was bigger than what Michelle, Austin, and I needed. And Gabrielle wanted to start her married life in a good place. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. This man had kicked me out on the street at 15, hadn't contacted me in 16 years, and now he was coming to ask me to give my house to Helen's daughter. The rage I felt in that moment was indescribable. But there was also something else. A cold clarity. I told him no, obviously, that this house was for my family, for my wife and my son. He got furious, started saying I was selfish, that Gabrielle was my sister and I should help her, that he had raised me and I owed him something, and that's where it exploded. I said, do I owe something to the man who kicked me out of his house based on lies, to the man who never wanted to hear my side, to the man who left me on the street at 15? He went quiet, and I continued, because 16 years of rage were coming out. I told him that Helen had lied, that it had all been to get rid of me, and before I could stop myself, I said, and besides, Gabrielle isn't even your daughter. The silence that followed was deathly. My dad looked at me like I'd spoken to him in another language. I repeated, calmer. Gabrielle isn't your biological daughter. She's Derek's daughter, the neighbor. Helen had an affair and got pregnant with him, not with you. I know because I heard her confess it on the phone when I was 15. My dad went pale, started shaking his head, saying I was a liar, that I was making things up out of revenge. But I could see in his eyes that part of him already suspected it. Maybe he'd always known deep down. Helen had come into the study when she heard the commotion, and when she understood what I had said, she became hysterical, screaming that I was a monster. How dare I destroy her family? Gabrielle had also arrived and was standing in the doorway, trying to understand what was happening. I asked them to leave my house. My dad left furious, Helen crying, Gabrielle in shock. Michelle found me sitting in the study like an hour later, shaking, and she just hugged me without saying anything. The next few days were chaos. My dad called me demanding proof, saying that if I was so sure, then we should do a DNA test. I agreed, although I knew I was just prolonging the inevitable. Derek no longer lived in the neighborhood. In fact, I found out later he had died from an overdose like 2 years earlier, but that didn't matter for the test. The results came 3 weeks later and confirmed what I already knew. Gabrielle wasn't my dad's biological daughter. She shared DNA with Derek. What happened next was worse than I expected. My dad confronted Helen violently, hit her, hurt her so badly she ended up in the hospital with 3 fractured vertebrae. He was arrested and eventually sentenced to 3 years in prison for assault. Helen ended up in rehab, but not just for the injuries. It came to light that she had an addiction to painkillers that went back years, from before my dad hit her. Gabrielle, poor thing, her engagement was canceled because her fiancé didn't want to deal with all the family drama. She tried to find Derek, her biological father, only to discover he had died from an overdose. Everything she had known as her life, her identity, her family, crumbled in a matter of weeks. Gabrielle contacted me a couple months later. She was angry, confused, hurt. She asked me why I had never said anything, why I had waited so long. I explained that I was just a kid when I found out, that I had tried to survive, that it hadn't been my secret to tell. But the truth is, I don't know if I did right or wrong. Part of me feels I should have said something years ago. Another part knows that if I had said it as a teenager, no one would have believed me, and it probably would have made things worse for me. Gabrielle ended up leaving the state. She wanted to start over where no one knew her, and I don't blame her. We talk occasionally, basically text messages, but the relationship is complicated because I represent the destruction of everything she knew. My dad is in prison. He has like 8 months left still. I haven't visited him. Haven't talked to him since that night at my house. I don't know if I ever will. Michelle tells me I should consider therapy, that carrying all this for so long has affected me in ways I might not fully recognize. She's probably right. She usually is. Last week, Austin asked me if he had grandparents. I told him it was complicated, but that, yes, he did. He asked if he could meet them someday, and I said, I didn't know. Maybe when he was older. He thought for a moment, and then said, It's okay, Dad. Anyway, I have Mom's parents, and they love me a lot. And he's right. Michelle's parents have been incredible with Austin. They're the grandparents he deserves. I look at my life now, and it's almost surreal to think about the path I've traveled. From being a homeless teenager living in an abandoned warehouse to owning my own company, having a house, a family I love. I should feel proud, and I am, but there's also this heaviness that doesn't go away. The guilt of having destroyed Gabrielle's life, even though technically I only told the truth that Helen had been hiding. The rage toward my dad that I still feel, despite the years. The emptiness of not having a family of origin, of my son growing up without knowing, his paternal grandfather, without having uncles from my side. Michelle says family isn't always blood, that we're building our own family. And I know she's right, but it still hurts. Sometimes I wonder how things would have been if that summer afternoon I hadn't walked through that park, if I hadn't seen Helen with Derek, or if I hadn't stayed listening to that phone conversation. Would I have kept living in that house, enduring the differential treatment toward Gabrielle, waiting for the day I could leave? Would Helen have found another way to get rid of me eventually? Would my dad have ever discovered the truth on his own? They're questions that have no answer. I guess. But I ask them anyway. But what I do know is that that information, that secret that wasn't mine, but that I ended up carrying for years, changed the course of my life completely, for better and for worse. There are days when Michelle finds me very quiet and just hugs me. She knows I'm thinking about all this, even though we don't talk about it as much as before. Austin is growing up so fast, he's about to turn 4, and I watch him play in the yard of our house, and I promise myself that he's never going to feel what I felt, that he's never going to doubt that I love him and support him unconditionally. I think that's what stayed with me most from all this. The determination to break that cycle, to be the father my dad never was for me. I don't know if that makes everything worthwhile. I don't think it works like that, but it's something. The last time I heard from Helen was like 6 months ago. A mutual friend told me she had gotten out of rehab and was living in a small apartment, working part-time at a store. Gabrielle doesn't talk to her, which makes sense. I don't feel sorry for Helen. Honestly, she made her bed and now has to lie in it, as they say. But I also don't feel the satisfaction I thought I'd feel seeing her fallen. I just feel nothing, really. It's like that part of my life happened so long ago that it doesn't affect me the same way anymore. Although I know that's not completely true, because if it were, I wouldn't be writing all this, right? Theodore died 3 years ago. I found out through Keith. I was never able to properly thank him for what he did for me, for having saved me in many ways when I was a lost and scared teenager. Keith closed the restaurant last year, retired and moved to Florida. We stay in touch. He sends me photos of his grandchildren. I send him photos of Austin. It's weird how the people who help you in the darkest moments are sometimes strangers who have no obligation to you, while the people who are supposed to care for you fail you in the worst possible ways. Michelle is pregnant again. We're going to have a girl. Austin is super excited to be a big brother. We're thinking about names. Michelle wants something classic. I agree with whatever she wants, honestly. We're going to need a bigger house eventually. I'm looking at some properties. One of the benefits of working in real estate is that I can find good opportunities. Life keeps moving forward, day by day. And most of the time, it's good. It really is good. But there are moments, usually late at night when everyone's asleep, when I think about everything that happened, about all the decisions that were made, mine and others, and how each one led to this exact moment. I don't know if I'll ever feel like everything is completely resolved. I think there are things that simply don't get completely resolved, that you just learn to live with them, to carry them in a way that doesn't destroy you. I've built a good life. I have people who love me and who I love. I have purpose and stability. It's more than I thought I'd have when I was 15, sleeping in an abandoned warehouse, wondering if things were ever going to get better. So I guess in that sense, I won. But it doesn't feel like winning, you know? It feels like surviving, like having made it to the other side of something horrible and standing there, a little bruised, a little broken, but standing nonetheless. And for now, that has to be enough.